Hello? Okay, yeah, okay. Okay. No, it's iPhone 13 Pro. Okay.
The iPhone 13 has come a long way since the very first one was launched in 2007. We could even argue that without the iPhone and the technological threshold it has exceeded over the years, our mobile phone experience will still be lagging way behind today. I have used practically all models of iPhones since the very first iPhone. I'm a photographer and filmmaker with close to 20 years of experience. And important to note is that I am an itinerant artist. That is to say, I travel and move around a lot. What has endeared me towards the iPhone more than anything else is a constant promise for a better phone camera. As I move around a lot, I create and capture inspiration spontaneously. As a result, I always want to have the best, most portable photo/video device. The iPhone has been that for me over the years. So for every new phone that comes out that promises improvements in the camera system, I always want to have my hands on it. Now, fast forward to 2021, we have the latest iterations of the iPhones, the iPhone 13 and the iPhone 13 Pro. I'll be focusing on the iPhone 13 Pro, and much of my review will focus on the promises of the latest camera system. This review will mostly benefit those who are interested in the camera and what it could do. But I will also touch on other aspects of the phone that are crucial to my everyday workflow as an artist, but also as an everyday person. So, let's get right into it. The iPhone 13 Pro comes in two different sizes, the iPhone 13 Pro and the iPhone 13 Pro Max. It also comes in 4 different colors. I choose to go for the graphite, and this is a highly subjective choice. I don't know, maybe it is my version of my midlife crisis, but lately I have been loving all things black, matte black, space gray, or in this case, graphite. But besides, I truly think it's a beautiful tone. Not exactly black or gray, just somewhere in between. Now, when it comes to size, the iPhone 13 Pro is just perfect. Last year, I went for the 12 Pro Max simply because it is the device with the best camera system. This year, however, the only difference between the Pro and the Pro Max is just the screen size and consequently the battery size. All right, let's talk cameras. The iPhone 13 Pro sports 3 cameras, a telephoto lens with a focal length of 77mm and an aperture of f2.8, a wide-angle lens with an aperture of f1.5 and an ultra-wide-angle lens with aperture of f1.8. So you can see that the wide-angle with the largest aperture is the best for low light. And by the way, for those who don't know, the smaller the number of the aperture, the larger it is. And a larger aperture is important for low light photography. With this year's Pro iPhones, the 3 lenses have been improved, but also the lenses are physically bigger than those of the 12 Pro. While the pixel size has been increased, the number of pixels has stayed the same at 12 megapixels. I am particularly impressed by the improvement in the ultra-wide-angle lens in the iPhone 13 Pro. Apple claims that it has improved the low light capacity or capability of the lens by 92%. Now, testing this in the everyday, the improvement is highly noticeable. However, I still find that when compared to the wide-angle lens, the ultra-wide-angle lens still struggles at the edges and in the darker areas when used in low-light conditions. In addition, Apple has activated the ultra-wide-angle lens for macro photography. What this means is that you can photograph a subject as close as 2 cm. The implementation is interesting. You may or may not like it, but regardless of what camera lens you are using, as soon as you come very close to the subject, it switches automatically. Now, while this is very convenient, it does not allow for any control of the process. This is something I will come back to as we discuss customization and agency of the photographer or filmmaker. The wide-angle lens has equally been improved. Apple claims it lets in 2.2 times more light than the iPhone 12 Pro. Well, I don't know how Apple comes about these numbers, but for me, the wide-angle lens in the 12 Pro didn't need much improvement. In other words, the improvement in the iPhone 13 Pro is negligible. The telephoto lens, however, is the interesting one. So Apple has increased the focal length from 2.5x to 3x. But to do that, they also had to decrease the size of the aperture from 2.4 to 2.8. That is to say, whatever gains were made with increase in focal length took something away from how the lens responds to low light. This was noticeable for me while using the lens, and honestly, I had expected something much better with this lens. Yes, the increased focal length helps for better portraiture, but I would have loved to see a wider aperture as well, say f2.2. In addition, Apple has made night mode available to all lenses. This points to the fact that Apple was doing everything in their power to increase the low light capability of these lenses. The night mode is also much more realistic and accounts for more gradations of midtones and shadows. Now let's talk about medium-specific features. Photography to start with. I have touched on macro photography and night mode, but let's not forget Apple ProRAW, which was introduced last year with the iPhone 12. I made an extensive video explaining what Apple ProRAW is, which you will find linked up somewhere here on the screen. In addition, Apple has introduced photographic styles. So how do I explain this? Okay, these are not filters, but rather think of them as a knockoff of Fujifilm's film simulation, for instance. So far, there are 5 different styles: standard, rich contrast, vibrant, vibrant warm, and cool. So when activated, they are baked into the photograph and you can't edit or adjust it in post-production. However, you can customize each of the styles to your taste before making the photos. Because it is a color profile rather than a filter, you also cannot use it alongside Apple ProRAW. It's one or the other. Now for me, I think it's a handy feature to have, especially if you want to be quick and instant. But I'd rather make my photos in RAW and then edit it in Adobe Lightroom. The presets in Lightroom is much richer than the new styles in the iPhone 13 Pro, if you ask me. Also, one thing I noticed, if you have photographic styles feature turned on, your images take a bit of time to process, like when a digital image is buffering. Perhaps this is some bug in iOS 15 that will be improved with software updates. I don't know. Let's see how it goes. Now, when it comes to video, 2 features stand out. One of which is Apple has a new mode called cinematic mode. Now, on first look, you might be tempted to think that cinematic mode is a portrait mode on video, but actually, that's only half of the truth. It does much more than that. With the cinematic mode, Apple has taken computational imaging a notch further. The idea is to mimic focus racking, a technique commonly used in professional cinematography, whereby focus and depth of field are used in a dynamic way to tell a visual story between subjects in a scene. The iPhone can rack focus from one subject to the other. What's amazing is that the iPhone does it automatically, and it gets it right most of the time. The only downside is that cinematic mode can only be filmed in 1080p at 30 frames per second. I particularly shoot everything these days in 4K at 24 frames per second. This might be a deal breaker for some serious filming. The good side though is that cinematic mode works with a selfie camera. So why is it not possible to use cinematic mode in 4K? Well, the simplest answer is that the real-time processing of an already HDR footage will make things just too heavy for the iPhone, even with the A15 Bionic chip that comes with the 13 Pro. Now, the second video feature is that from the iPhone 13 Pro going forward, iPhones are now able to film in Apple ProRes format. So imagine Apple ProRAW for photography and think of it in terms of video. That's what you get. For the same limitations as with the cinematic mode, Apple ProRes can only be filmed in 4K, starting with phones with 256 gigabytes of storage and above. So for those who are looking to buy a 128 gigabyte of iPhone 13 Pro, you can only film Apple ProRes in 1080p. So this is something to have in mind. Nonetheless, what is impressive about this format is that high quality compression format for film, only reserved for big budget production, is now possible with the mobile phone camera. That's amazing. The Apple ProRes format will be available sometime later this year, so I'm looking forward to incorporating it into my workflow and testing it out. All right, because we are talking about a mobile phone eventually, let's talk about some features that complements everyday usage, but also informs the visual aesthetics of the phone, the pleasantness of it. I want to touch on one of the most talked about features for this year's Pro iPhones. It is the Pro Motion Display. First, the brightness of the screen has been increased up to 1000 nits of display brightness. And of course, for outdoor photography or video, this is very handy. I mean, this is the same display brightness as many of the monitors used for professional filming. But also, for the first time, the iPhone supports a high refresh rate. In everyday use, this makes a whole lot of difference. Animations are smoother and truer to the finger gestures. Transitions between apps, motion graphics are much easier and realistic to the eye. As a visual artist heavily reliant on aesthetics, I do not take this for granted in any way. The refresh rate is also variable from as low as 10 Hz to as high as 120 Hz. What variable refresh rate means is that gestures are much more realistic while saving on battery. So, in other words, this feature has also improved the battery consumption of the iPhone display. Now, speaking of battery, well, Apple claims that the battery of the iPhone 13 Pro lasts 1.5 hours more than that of the 12 Pro that came before it. It's also why the phone is a bit heavier. It physically has a bigger battery. Well, so far, the battery has been impressive for me. I charge it in the morning and by evening it's about 40% left. And that's with heavy use ranging from browsing the internet to watching movies and content on YouTube. All right, what about accessories? Every time I get a new phone, the question of how to protect my exorbitantly priced possession arises. But then, what is the point of wrapping your iPhone in a case that's inferior to the aesthetic design of the phone itself? And why put an unverified screen protector over a screen that's been optimized to give you the best tactile experience? Well, the simple answer to that paradox is you want to protect your prized device for as long as you use it. As such, you want to carefully research your screen protector, much like the way the photographer will research his UV filter for his lenses before buying, because he will be shortchanging himself by putting an inferior UV filter over his expensive lens. And it's not so much about the money as it is the fact that he is cutting off a part of the device's functionality. Yes, the same applies to the iPhone as well. Now, I found that the Apple case, the MagSafe one, is expensive at, I think, 65 euro. So I went for this one by a company called Humix. I found them on Amazon, Regardless of how I love this case, I realized that it does not work with my MagSafe wallet, and it is a little bit quirky, to be charged with my MagSafe charger as well. So I was forced to pick up the Apple case for this reason. I will still keep the Humix case as I believe it protects my device in tougher conditions than the Apple case. But all of this is to say that as you go out to research for your cases, think of the MagSafe functionality. Remember not to overlook the wireless charging feature as well. There are a few quirks I have noticed, none of which are existential in nature. But to start with, Apple for a long time calls their phone a pro camera, but I begin to feel this is more true for how they mimic pro camera features than how much of agency they give to pro content creators. There is no way, for instance, to change the aperture or ISO of the camera when using it. If I can change my ISO and aperture, perhaps I'll have a better bokeh with the telephoto lens when I make portraits with it. Of course, there are many third-party apps that could do this, but last time I checked, it's still true that the more apps you add to your chain of production, the less efficient you become. Besides, I would love to see Apple bake this customizations option into their hardware because they will do it better than any third-party company out there. So Apple needs to understand that to be a pro is also to be in control of your creative decisions. Furthermore, you still cannot compare the camera of a phone to a good and portable mirrorless camera. As a reference, I have my Fuji SS10. It was released in 2020 and like the iPhone, aimed at everyday person who want to dabble, perhaps seriously, with photography. For one, no matter how much you push computational gimmicks, the laws of physics will catch up with you. Apple cannot put into the iPhone a sensor the size of the one you find in the SS10. It's just physically not possible. And while Apple has managed up until now to achieve the impossible with regards to the size of the sensor on the phone, the limitations are glaringly noticeable in most cases. The pixels of the SS10 seems tighter and more realistic, as if much of the work is left to the lens and the aperture, you know, like the good old days of analog camera. The photos from the iPhone, on the other hand, seem heavily processed. It aims to dramatize every scene. Take, for instance, the portrait mode. Every so often, it adds a smoothing to the skin and adds more shine. In the case of dark skin, such as mine, it aims to brighten it. Coming from a time of analog photography, I often find this computational image processing an overkill. That said, there are things that the iPhone 13 Pro camera does really well, even sometimes better than many mirrorless cameras. The iPhone is very good with high dynamic range, regardless of the light condition. It automatically and seamlessly solves a photographic problem known to many photographers as being a headache in post-production. It exposes accurately for the sky even when the subject is backlit. High dynamic range technology is where the mobile phone takes the lead in the game of instant photography and cinematography. Now, mirrorless camera manufacturers are still playing catch-up in this regard. In conclusion, it's safe to say that for a pro photographer or a filmmaker, you should think of the iPhone camera specifically rather than in relation to professional cameras. If you are going for the iPhone, you are perhaps thinking of convenience and portability, or maybe spontaneousness or spontaneity. If these things are more important than the quality of your production, then the iPhone is all you need. But if maximum quality and fidelity to your content is important to you, then your iPhone camera is at best a backup plan. In this context, the iPhone 13 Pro is an incredibly good, if not the best phone I have used yet, with regards to both the overall user experience and the mobile phone camera system. So that's about it. I hope you found this video informative or the least bit entertaining. If you did, consider leaving a like and, much better, a comment. Let's make this a conversation. Also, if you would like to see even more videos of this kind, please consider subscribing to the channel. Now, on that note, I wish you a wonderful day or night, depending on your time zone, and see you in the next video, which will be pretty soon. Bye-bye.